Good evening, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the Strive Sports Podcast. As always, I am your host with the most, Keegan Hartman. Make sure to find me and follow me on my socials at Keegan Hartman1 via Twitter, at Kigo Amigo via Instagram. Shoot, while I'm on here, you might as well go ahead and, follow the main socials of the account, the Strive Sports Podcast. If you're new to the channel on YouTube, new to the content, you just go ahead and give us a follow. Subscribe to the channel, like this, and comment. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you think. Likewise, follow us on all of our socials at Strive Sports Mo via Twitter, at Strive Sports Productions via Instagram, and at Strive Sports Mo on TikTok. Also, before I forget, huge shout out to Royal Retros. Look, I know y'all have seen the Jalen Hurts images of him rocking his Birmingham Barracudas jersey, and maybe even seen Joe Burrow, Joe Shiesty, rocking his Pop CFL jersey. Well, if you didn't already know, the leading producer of Defunct Team merchandise is also a partner of this very show. And right now, with the holiday season upon us, get your shopping done. For our listeners only, right now, tap the link below this video on YouTube and also on Apple Podcasts. I'll post the link as well in the description. Use promo code STRIVE, STRIVE, and save yourself 10% upon checkout. So bills are paid. We got that out of the way, quick and painless. And now we get into the fun. Episode number 11 of season 1. We are one episode, I should say, away from this thing being concluded. And I'm going to keep the home runs going. I guess the cat's out of the bag. Ladies and gentlemen, my next guest, my esteemed guest, is the busiest man in spring football right now. The busiest man in spring football journalism game, I would say. I don't know what you. Hey, man, the journalism. Let me just go ahead and say something real quick. The journalism game for spring football right now is at an all-time high, given the fact of the news that we're going to be getting into in a minute. And this man is spearheading all of the conversation, at least one of the main cogs in it. Mr. James Larsen has contributed nearly 650 articles and counting to Pro Football Network's platform. He's been at the epicenter of this current XFL USFL merger talk, given that he's played an integral role in being fans and the players, for that matter, eyes and ears, as both the XFL and USFL are seeking a common ground in their emergence. Look, if you're not already following the guy, the cat's already out of the bag. Make sure you find him and follow him at James Larsen PFN on Twitter, at James Larsen Official via Instagram. James, I gave you one of the quickest intros on here. I'm sorry. It's a gift and a curse, I guess. We can get into conversation. How you doing, brother?
That is the longest intro anybody's ever given me, ever. So congratulations, Keegan. I'm honestly, I'm glad it was quick according to your standards. I don't know how much more we could have gone on about me on that one. But besides the point, I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me on. How's everything with you, brother?
Oh, it's good, man. I'm chilling. We're 3 pages deep typically on an intro. I mean, and I guess it's different with players because obviously, their careers are extensive, so you have to elaborate on each thing. But nevertheless,
You're not going to go into my player history at all? I'm kidding.
What's the player history like, my friend?
There's none.
You set up the segue, though. We won't get into the player history, but I will get into your background. So you're a graduate of Liberty University. You went to study, I believe you said business admin. I want to give you the same platform I give anybody else on this show. I want to talk about you, James, as growing up, what became, how did you get into where you are now? What kind of fueled that drive to get to the spot that you are now? And what are your plans for the future going forward as far as this the journalistic thing goes? Because right now you're batting 1,000, my friend. Let me tell you, you may not say it, but I'll say it for you. You're killing the game, dude.
I appreciate that, man. Yeah, it's been a long journey. I let the cat out of the bag right away, since cat out of the bag is the phrase that you've been using quite a bit so far. I think it's a trend we're going to set for this episode here. But I don't do journalism full time. This is all like a side gig. I mean, I have a day job just like a lot of other people in the scene, because I mean, let's be honest, spring football, there's not really a lot of this in it right now, which is okay. That's the goal, is you put in the work now and hopefully it pays off later on down the road. So that's kind of been my whole mantra throughout this whole process. Is it's something I'm extremely passionate about. Obviously, it's something that I got into a few years ago when the Alliance of American Football started playing, and then when the XFL kicked off in 2020, that was when I really connected with Pro Football Newsroom. I was looking around at some different networks, and they were the ones that picked me up and gave me an opportunity, and I'm really really grateful for that. It's been an awesome few years working with the crew over there, especially Stefan and Zach Conlon, the guys that run the USFL podcast. They do a lot for the Pro Football Newsroom. But yeah, for me, it's always been something that I love doing, something that I kind of taught myself, I guess you could say. I've always been involved in web and social media, content creation. All those are big passions of mine. So combining that with spring football is just something I am extremely grateful for.
I will say this, man. I didn't give you your flowers, and I'm gonna give them now. I'm gonna say you're one of the coldest dudes with a camera. I will say I've seen your content.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man.
Your photos are on point, dude. And it's not just me that notices that. I think a lot of players around the league, they love what you do, and you've done a tremendous amount for this. So you've definitely pioneered and cemented yourself as one of the biggest names. But I will say, I know I don't know if you get this often, but I'm like, when I mention your name, immediately what comes to mind, I think of like, Adam Schefter of the NFL and whatnot. Do you look at those guys as kind of like Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport? Do you kind of look at those guys as like some of the people that you would take sort of like an inspiration from or influence from? Were those people that you kind of inspired to be, or kind of tell me about, some of the people in the NFL, if there was anybody that you kind of were inspired by to take on what you've done now?
No, that's a great question. And for me, it's of course those guys are like the biggest names in the scene. So I mean, sure. I mean, if you're asking like James, do you want to be like Adam Schefter one day? Of course. I mean, come on. I'm in the journalism scene, but for me, it's something where there's hundreds upon hundreds of these NFL accounts. Whether it's Adam, whether it's guys like ML Football, Jordan Schultz, anybody, a lot of guys in the scene that are constantly reporting great information, whether it's player signings, whether it's just promoting players, things like that, promoting the things going on in the NFL. There's really nobody doing it for spring football. I think that's where like my passion for this scene has just been so big, because I know so many of these guys. I know how hard they work. I know what they're doing behind the scenes, and I know hardly anybody else is really giving them a spotlight. So for me, it's less about me. Like this whole platform that I've tried to build, whether it's my personal Twitter or the things that I do with Pro Football Newsroom. Like I never want it to be about me or my name. For me, it's about how can I continue to use my assets and my skills to make spring football an even bigger platform for these guys moving forward. And the little things I can do, whether it's just tweeting about a player or posting somebody's highlights or giving somebody a shout out or writing an article about a prospect that wants to be in the league. For me, again, it always comes back to for the player, hashtag for the player, I guess you could say. That's just my mantra. That's something that I really love. And again, I'm so passionate about these players. Like I just want to see these guys get as many opportunities as possible. And if there's little things I can do to help them along the way, then I'm going to do everything I can.
Likewise, my friend. I've been fortunate enough to be able to befriend and network with a lot of these people because of my opportunities that I've had in the past, and I'm just dipping my feet in the water. Hopefully, I think there's a lot of opportunities for it to grow, and especially with the conversation we're going to be getting into a little while later. But I will go back to your point, man. Like anything I can do to help propel those players or make them feel comfortable within this current environment right now. You never know. I often think that a lot of players don't like to think of this as their forever home, but I also want to give it that sense of comfort and that sense of, translate over from the NFL. I want them to feel like, hey, this is a big deal. And especially with what we've got going on here shortly, apparently, it's going to become an even bigger deal. So I want these players to feel comfortable. I want them to know that they are being talked about, whether it be
Exactly.
mostly positive, but you would hope. But no, I just want to create that environment that they would feel comfortable in. So 100% get that sentiment if you wanted to add to that or anything.
No, 100%, man. And I love the work that you've been doing. Obviously, you were social intern there with the USFL this year and getting all that fire content. And since then, the work hasn't stopped for you. Obviously, you've been doing this podcast. I see you creating some sick highlight videos for some of these guys. So it's just awesome to see what you're doing, what a lot of other young people are doing in this scene. I feel like it's kind of like ushering in, like, not only are we like ushering in a new league and a new brand of football, I also feel like we're ushering in like a new generation of media that's covering
And,
these leagues, and
and
that for me is always something I've loved to do. Like I love pioneering. I love like just trying to take from other people that I look at on Twitter, on Instagram, on other social medias, and then using my own personal creative genius, which maybe that's not the right term, and just trying to create something that's fresh, that's new, that's relatable, something that these players can relate to, something the fans can relate to. And I feel like that's what spring football is all about. It's just creating those new opportunities, creating those new paths, and creating those unorthodox ways to get to the top.
right, right. Sorry, I was choking on a piece of ice there.
Oh, you're
No,
good.
I 100% get the sentiment, and you hit it on the head. No, I think there's a tremendous opportunity and tremendous demand right now, especially in the direction that the league is going. Both leagues about to become one, possibly, potentially. So I don't want to keep the people guessing anymore. I'm done spitting hints and everything. Let's get past the patronizing and let's go ahead and get into it. So I want to start with the most recent news, and that is the I don't know how do you want to paint this timeline. I wrote out a timeline. Obviously, we have an outline that we're kind of abiding by here, kind of breaking down day by day what we've learned so far. I guess it would be instrumental to kind of start from the beginning. I do have a lot of questions, centered around how this kind of cultivated and came to pass. And I want to go back, truthfully, let's go back to September 28th. And this was when the first reports of the USFL and the XFL announcing their intent to merge. If you've been living in a cave for the past 3 months and you're just now seeing the news, breaking news, the USFL and XFL are announcing their intent to merge. This was released on September 28, 2023. It was per XFL.com. Obviously, James, I believe you probably would have been one of the first ones to report this amongst a few other people on Twitter. I don't really know who the first one was. If you have a name, I think Axios was the first ones to technically report it a week after, but
Yes.
yes.
Axios had dropped the news, I believe, on September 19th.
Right.
Because it was a Tuesday. It was a Tuesday before the Thursday that the leagues officially acknowledged it.
Right.
So we got some news from them and from Sportico, and then everything else just kind of spiraled from there.
Everything has a start. These guys were drinking martinis or by the beach or something, and something had to spark up to be like, hey, let's start a merger. Do you have any context to how these conversations came to pass and how we got to September 28th?
I
To
I
start?
have a little bit of context. And
Yeah,
obviously there's some things I can't necessarily get into.
I get
But these conversations started basically right after, and actually they probably started before, but the main one started after the USFL championship in July. So that was July 1st. And I believe, from what I've been told, within the week, those conversations really started to ramp up. Originally, seems like the conversations were more along the lines of let's try to not be so competitive with each other, because the USFL and the XFL were going a little head to head this year. Maybe actually it wasn't a little, it was a lot. I mean, we saw some commercials from Fox. We saw some shots from The Rock. We saw some banter between both leagues. Obviously they were competing. They were competing for the spring football market.
right.
So originally these talks came from a perspective of let's not be so competitive, and then they morphed into the merger talks that we're seeing now. So
And I kind of want context because I know that there was talk about Redbird, which is the financial group that is on the XFL side of things, and allegedly there was concern over the financial situation, or the financial outlook, I guess is the best way to put it, of the XFL. From an economic standpoint, would you say that that was mostly what generated this to kind of expedite into full force and ultimately put us where we are now? Because this is, if you ask me, I feel like mergers personally take years of preparation. This is taking like 5-6 months. And really, I just don't think it was a well. This is just my personal opinion. I don't think it's been a well thought out thing. I think it's kind of been moving frantically. But if you wanted to add some clarity to that, what kind of expedited this so quickly and rapidly?
Well, at the end of the day, everything comes down to one thing, and that's money.
Mm,
So, spring
mm,
football, there's not usually a lot of money. Obviously, there's a decent amount of money involved when you start, but you go through that money very quick. We
right.
saw with the XFL, Forbes came out with that report that they lost 60 million. I
Yep.
can tell you it was more than that. It was a lot of money lost for Redbird there in that first season, which is to be expected because that's what happens when you start a professional football league. I'm sure Fox has had some losses of their own, some investments of their own. It's a little bit different since Fox, was a broadcasting group that owned the league, whereas the XFL, they were Dwayne Johnson, Danny Garcia, and then Redbird Capital, and then they had a partnership deal with Disney and ESPN and ABC. But anyways, besides that, money is always the most important thing when it comes to these leagues, and I think both leagues know that they can't survive long term if they're both competing with each other. It's just not spring football is just not a big enough market for that. It's one thing if you're competing with the CFL, but if you're competing with a league in America that's doing the same thing that you're doing with an almost identical structure and almost identical viewership, at the end of the day, you're just going to run out of money on both sides. So I think ultimately this comes down to the finances and also comes down to being able to partner with, now you have the firepower of Fox Sports, you have the firepower of Redbird Capital, you've got, ABC involved. You have a lot of potential here. It honestly reminds me of what we had in 2020 with the XFL under Vince McMahon,
Mm.
where you had that ABC and Fox partnership that really helped the league get such great results through those 5 weeks before it shut down. So that to me, that part of this is just common sense. Part of it is some things that have heard behind the scenes, but it always comes down to money.
And Redbird Capital, thank you very much. So Redbird Capital, there was a theory going around that there was, and you had said over 60 million, possibly more, what was lost in that first season, which, as you said, was expected. Was that kind of the maybe you're re-elaborating, re-emphasizing something here for me, but just to confirm it, that was kind of the major player here for the XFL to really expedite this, was the fact that, hey, we've lost over $60 million in our first year. Unless you guys want to, get even into a deeper hole the next year, I suggest that we potentially reach out to, the other spring league, the USFL, and see if they're able to partner, potentially formulating a spring football league juggernaut, if you will. I guess just confirming that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it went exactly like that. I know from what I was told, Redbird initiated the talks.
Mhm.
But it feels like it was both sides was mutual. They both understood the situation where, hey, we have an opportunity to make this thing really big. We have an opportunity to make this thing last, but we're not going to be able to do either of those things if we don't come together and unite. I feel like that was kind of the overall, guess you could say, attitude behind the scenes of just where these two organizations were at. And even though they both have different models, I think both of them are kind of putting those aside a bit and realizing like, hey, we can take things from the USFL, we can take things from the XFL. What we have to do is just make sure we try to make this thing last long term.
If there's so much, I won't say animosity, but you talked about those subtle, the shade that was thrown by The Rock and whatnot, which I find ironic. If all that was going on, all that was transpiring, why doesn't Fox Sports and USFL say something along the lines of, like, why do you need us? Like, I just don't see what pushes the USFL out there to want to help. But obviously they're probably better
So,
than me, I guess.
right. And again, everything always comes back to money. and
Right.
it always comes back to what's best for business.
Mhm.
And the XFL, they have some amazing markets. They've got St. Louis, they've got DC, they've got San Antonio, they've got some of the best spring football markets on the planet.
Right.
So for Fox, obviously their goal is to always been has always been to get into markets.
Mhm.
Of course, USFL's model, it wasn't all about having butts and seats, as we can tell from their hub model, but ultimately that's the plan. That's what they want to do. And I think what Fox is seeing here is that this is a golden opportunity for them to maintain their stake as a broadcaster, to maintain their stake in spring football, but to combine with an organization that allows them to get into some of those great markets that should lead to better TV viewership and that should lead to hopefully longevity in the spring scene.
So fast forwarding to September 28th then, and I'll read that statement that I've got there on the timeline. This was per XFL.com. Today, the USFL, the United States Football League, and the XFL, not coined the Extreme Football League, but XFL, announced their intentions to merge, subject to customary regulatory approvals, and if the transaction is consummated, the new league will establish best-in-class operations based on the most recent seasons of both leagues. The historic combination will anchor professional spring football with substantial capabilities and resources to ensure future growth and continue to enhance the development of the collective players, coaches, and staff that are coming together. More details regarding the new league will be announced at a later date. Continuing on, interesting little tidbit to note here. On October 6th, Mike Mitchell of the XFL News Hub, shout out Mike Mitchell, dropped an article which elaborated on the mutual agreement between Redbird Capital and Fox Sports. This was from Mike Mitchell's article. XFL News Hub has learned that Redbird Capital Partners and Fox Sports have come to an agreement to merge the XFL and USFL on a non-binding term sheet that is currently undergoing regulatory review with the DOJ. Let me pause right there. So the non-binding term sheet, this was kind of the preliminary phase or the first phase, if you will, of them trying to expedite and kind of put forth the concept of merging and getting this expedited to the DOJ, or if I'm not mistaken, the FTC can also review these as well, and or approve these mergers. Can you elaborate and kind of I don't get the jargon here, the government jargon. So maybe you might be able to add a little bit more clarity to the best of your ability on kind of what this first step was, what that foundation was for them, and what just I guess start there, trying to paint the picture why that was the phase, what that entails, and what that was going to do to start this whole thing up.
Yeah, so to be honest with you, a lot of that stuff is behind the scenes legally. A lot of that is
Right.
protected by NDAs and things. So we don't know the full details of what all that entailed.
That's
What we
valid.
do know is that, these leagues, obviously, they want to push this along, and they've always wanted to push this along for 2024. That was kind of the goal, right off the bat. So I know for a fact that they were always pushing to let's try to move this along quickly. Let's get this approved. Hey, DOJ, please let us move forward with this because we really need to get this done by 2024. That's kind of been the vibe that I've gotten from that whole situation. And obviously, I don't want to jump ahead of this timeline that we're on, but obviously based on what we saw last week, it seems like things are moving in that direction.
It goes on to say that article by Mike Mitchell says the merger terms on the term sheet have been submitted for review and approval. That was as of September 28th. So it's already surpassed its 30-day waiting period, which would have bottomed out at October 28th. In the world of mergence, the best way to break this down, and this was a side note that I put here. So there was kind of three phases from what I gathered, and this was per DOJ. This was mergers and acquisitions. More specifically, is the best way to break down this particular merger into three phases, and the three phases were pre-combination, combination, solidification, and advancement. Combination being involving the integration of companies, uh, solidification and advancement, which forms the new entity. So needless to say, let me just jump right through that because I'm not going to elaborate into all those terms. We're only given so much time. There's a lot of legal hoops that a lot of people are kind of bypassing, and it's not just the audience. I mean, there's staff that are probably like, what are we waiting on? And I think really what we're waiting on right now, honestly, I'm just assuming here, I still think we're in that government phase. Like, I still think that there are things that need to be done because this is such
Absolutely.
long period of time that we're having to review this being expedited in the first place. Go back to September 28th. We're on day, if you look at the review process, is about 90 days. Technically, we would be on day 67 as of today. So they could still be in the process of reviewing things. And we could not.
Definitely in the process of reviewing something. Sorry to cut you off there. But to kind of answer, I guess, the question that you're getting at is we're at a point where there are still some hurdles to jump through when it comes to finalizing everything. As for the announcement last week, where the government approved some things, the antitrust, I was told that the government, quote unquote, stepped aside. So that leads me to believe that things are moving forward. That it's going to be a while before we get official news. But that was something that I was told last week is the government stepped aside, and that's why we saw the news that we did.
So now we get into, let me transition, and I will make these tidbits a little bit shorter and sweeter. October 10th, 2023, roughly 3 weeks after the original reports on the intent to merge, we are told that the United Football League and the UFL were both trademarked according to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Now, according to the report by Sports Business Journal, oh, Scott, excuse me, man, dude, Chipotle's getting to me. And Nick Boyle of the San Antonio Express, TMI, XFL's camp were the ones to initiate these filings for the trademarks under XFL Properties LLC. Now, there were 22, if I'm not mistaken, trademark filings on behalf of the XFL properties. I know that they're probably not going to release what the others may have been, but I also know that the USFL had also trademarked the National Spring Football League. As far as the name goes, I think we've already come to the consensus that it is going to proceed, if it does, the United Football League. But what is that? I mean, there was a bunch of trademarks that the USFL did during.
Yeah.
What is
So basically that whole process was about let's secure some of these names so we have the rights to use whichever one we decide upon.
Gotcha.
Right? Because obviously the USFL has the USFL, the XFL is the XFL. And then you can kind of dot I's with like, oh, the USFL trademark this one, the XFL trademark that one. That to me isn't too big of a deal because either way, the leagues are going to come together and use one of those names. As you said, everything's pointing in the direction of United Football League. That seems to be the direction that they're heading in. But at the time, they trademarked both of those names specifically because they wanted to make sure that they locked them up so that nobody else could take them and so that they wouldn't have to worry about, because we've seen before in the past where out of nowhere, some random spring football league will pop up with whatever brand new name they came up with. So that initial trademark was, of course, for the future, but also in a way just to make sure that they had them under their own belts.
And you go back to 2009, I want to say there was a United Football League, and it was, I believe it was titled the UFL. If I'm not mistaken, it was the United Football League, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it spanned for 4 seasons from 2009 to 2012. I think it folded in October of 2012. The UFL actually was originally coined by Vince McMahon, who was the WWE co-founder. He had ideated that potential name as a possibility for a spring football league when he was trying to get back into the business in 2018. Ultimately, the XFL made its return. And well, there was the AAF, then the XFL. So yeah. So fast forward October 20th, or excuse me, make sure I'm seeing right, October 20th, 2023. So you tweet out the following: developing, multiple sources have indicated that there is a strong possibility that all 8 USFL teams will survive the USFL and XFL merger. Hey, disclaimer, don't want to put any pressure on you. I'm not going to put pressure on you. I'm just reading what you wrote. And this was, mind you,
It's out there. It's out there.
It was October 20th. So
yeah,
I know things are subject to change, but let me just continue on. A 12-team league could feature just 4 XFL teams: St. Louis, DC, San Antonio, Arlington. No surprise there. Would be the likeliest organizations to survive. So disregard that last note there, but focusing on the tweet itself, what
what happened?
What the hell happened? Yes, that is.
Yeah. As you said, things change. And as really throughout this whole process, the bottom line has always looked where we were always thinking.
I'd like to consider myself a sports memorabilia connoisseur. I mean, if you watch the podcast on YouTube, you look behind me, you see I got all the Broncos memorabilia, the Baker Mayfield jersey. It's a little bit disorganized, but don't hold it against me. Nevertheless, I just have a deep appreciation for memorabilia because I feel that each piece tells a tremendous story and conveys a lot about a team's history. But when I arrived at the USFL last season, contributing as one of their on-site social media producers, I was quickly introduced firsthand to one of the leading clothing brands, not only within the USFL, but in leagues such as the Canadian Football League, the Arena Football League, Minor League Baseball, National Basketball Association, and those are just to name a few. This brand has propelled themselves and cemented themselves as the leaders in defunct team merchandise and memorabilia. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to share that Strive Sports Podcast, Strive Sports Productions, has teamed up with the leader in USFL merchandise, Royal Retros. From hats and jerseys to t-shirts and replica football helmets, they've got everything. Royal Retros has become a pioneer in paying homage to classic sports teams. And whether you are a fan of basketball, baseball, football, or even hockey, Royal Retros has something for everyone. As a matter of fact, with the holiday season just right around the corner, get ahead on your shopping list right now and head on over to their website. As a matter of fact, get your phone out and you can scan the bottom left QR code located in the bottom left corner of the screen, and it'll prompt you and take you over to the Royal Retros website. Once there, feel free to peruse the site. They've got everything: basketball, baseball, hockey, football. Like I said, one of the best, if not the best, in defunct team merchandise and memorabilia. And once you're at checkout, go ahead and use promo code STRIVE. That's promo code STRIVE, STRIVE. Save yourself 10% on your next purchase with them. A great way to support the leaders in defunct team merchandise and memorabilia, and a great way to support the show. Big shout out to Royal Retros for partnering with us and allowing us to join them on this opportunity.
At least 10 to 12 teams, right? I
Right.
mean, you have 16 teams between both leagues. We've always thought that, maybe they go down to 10. But 12 would be the happy medium, right? No way in heck they go to 8. There's just no possible chance it would be 8. Obviously, things have changed since then. We'll get to that later. The initial word was 12. So basically at that point, October 20th, and this really originated, that was a story that I sat on for about 2.5 weeks. And then we got word from inside the league. They were hearing the same thing. I had a couple other sources tip me off that week that, like, hey, this is the direction they're going in. It's going to be, they're going to keep all 8 USFL teams. They want a 12-team league. They're cutting out a few of the XFL teams that don't have venues secured or just aren't geographically, in the right spot. So, like, you look at a team like Seattle or look at a team like Vegas, those teams are just way on the other side. The idea is that they were moving away from those markets to, again, keep costs down, to keep these cities closer. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say other than that was the plan at the time. And obviously, this has been a very long process, so things change. But, yeah, I guess all that to say is at the time, it wasn't wrong information. But, again, that's what happens in this scene where things constantly change. It's been fluid. We've seen so many different reports up until this point. So, yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I got a few questions for you. I'm gonna apply the pressure. I gotta be a journalist, James. So originally it was 10. What was proposed to actually no, the 12 is right. The 12 from what I've gathered, the 12, this is all a matter of proposing. So it was 12, 10, and then I think there was at one point they were declined a certain framework. Maybe it was a proposal. I don't know how they submit these things to the government. I don't know how that process goes. But when you're trying to present a merger, you're presenting basically everything on the table. 12, 10. Okay, you don't like either one of those. Let's go 8. And then now that seems to be the standing point where we're at. I don't know. Provide clarity on the communication between. Obviously, you can't really give too much transparency, but to the best of your.
So you mentioned them having a declined proposal and originally 8 was declined.
Okay.
Originally the government was like, get that out of here. Like, no way. You're
Okay.
not cutting all those jobs.
Okay.
And that's kind of why I brought up the point earlier about the government, quote unquote, stepping aside.
Yeah.
That is the wording that I was told from a very good source of mine within one of these leagues. The government stepped aside. They expect news this week, and then we did end up getting the news that the antitrust review was complete. They got through that. So for whatever that's worth, 8. It feels like 8 was the general direction that these leagues wanted all along, but they were thinking about 10 or 12 just because the government was pushing that. That's what the government originally wanted.
And we're at a standstill right now, at which it hinders a lot of jobs right now. Like I hate to be that guy to bring that up, but it's the fact of the matter right now.
It's the worst part about it. I mean, I'm sick to my stomach thinking about seeing 8 teams disappear. Even if you increase roster sizes, there's a ton of guys who have worked their butts off for these opportunities. And I think, it kind of something I think I said on the End Zones show late last week. It's like spring football. It's all about providing opportunities, not taking them away. So again, it's part of the business. It happens, but it is rough to see it. If this does come to pass the way it's looking like.
And I'm going to be real with you, James. Like I said it before we got on here, like that puts into question my confidence on this merger proceeding, because we took 5 months and what should be a long, extensive process to evaluate this merger. We condensed it down to probably about 4 to 5 months max to try to get everything in a row. And what it cost was, you cut half the teams of what you initially would have had into 8. It just like, there's so much that has been risked, and it's like we still don't know if that is true. We still don't know if that is false. Don't know what these players can do. And now you're up against the clock, because now you've got 2 months. You got December. You're expecting possibly a supplemental draft where free agents, if there's free agents, are we going to throw them in a hopper?
There definitely will be at some point. There's just no clarity on a date for that yet.
Right. And then,
yeah, I mean, we're looking at a February 17th start date for training camp. So
and
they need to get this stuff moving.
Figured out. And look, Under Armour in their uniforms. So you've got that also that you're concerned with. On top of that, you've got the rookie.
Which I don't know if that's been made public yet, but in case anybody's listening, that's the direction things are going in. Under Armour. Yeah. No surprise is going to be involved. I mean, as long as The Rock's involved, Under Armour is likely to be involved.
I mean, I think the writing's on the wall for that one, because the XFL taking the reins here. And there's so much uncertainty still, even with what you're telling me. I'm just like, man, I don't know. I'm like, I said,
well, I'll tell you one thing, the state, and last week was about as disastrous of an announcement as you could have possibly had, because basically, John Vogel sent out a tweet. Mike Mitchell sent out a tweet. I had sent out a tweet, right, about 8 teams, but I didn't specify which teams. I just kind of said that's the direction it's going in. Right. And then we had a couple guys tweet out, and all credit to them. These guys, I really appreciate Mike Mitchell's work. I love John Vogel's work. It seems to me that some of that information getting out just caused some unrest and caused it just, again, like you said, things are just not being run the way we kind of would think they would be run by, Fox and by the XFL. Like, it's just, things are very confusing, right? But we were supposed to get a little bit more with that announcement, and we did not. Not only that, we didn't get either league acknowledging it on their socials. All we got was Danny Garcia posting to her Instagram, the official little press release of that things passed the antitrust review. And then, of course, we got Sports Business Journal and Sportico getting a couple of quotes from the league. And that was it. That was all we got. So the last week was definitely underwhelming, but it is confirmation that this is moving forward.
Just real quick, based off of last week and everything that had happened, how many people were blowing up your phone, and did you get any sleep last week?
I don't want to talk about it. No, okay. No, it's good. I got sleep. But it was a pretty hectic. It's been hectic ever since then. It was hectic before then. Yeah. Because I mean, I had known about this for a while. I knew the news was coming on Thursday. I had been going back and forth with a bunch of different contacts. Yeah, and everybody, I'd say a few days before Thursday was when the 8 really started to pick up steam, just from the people that I was talking to. I had, some sources tip me off, and then I was going back and forth with others, and it's like, hey, so 8 teams really seems like a possibility now, and everyone started to panic, and then all the reports came out. It's like, oh boy, this is happening. So,
And I know that I would be remiss if I didn't ask it just to throw it out there, because I know that players watch my stuff, and I'm grateful. I'm tremendously grateful. Like I said, you and I have both developed relationships with these players, and we know them on a more personal level. Like, I mean, they're humans too. At the end of the day, they've got. I mean, this is their job. This is their livelihood. But I would be remiss in just trying to ask this, like, what is the outlook for those that, I mean, obviously rosters are getting expanded to 90 man is potentially what we're looking at, but like
right.
nothing.
I mean, that would unfortunately only be for training camp, but
Right, right. It's just like I want to give them some sort of sense of comfort, and I just don't know if I can give that to them. Like, I don't know if there's any sort of assurance because of the state we're in right now. I want,
yeah.
but
I'm in the same boat with you there, because there's not a lot of positivity you can take out of 6 to 8 teams getting cut. Even like you said, with rosters, they could up the roster size a little bit, but they can't go that far. I mean, they don't have the money to have super big rosters. I mean, typically, my guess is maybe they could expand to like 55 players on a roster for the regular season, but that still leaves hundreds upon hundreds of people without a job. I think the bottom line, I was just talking to Cole Murphy today, earlier today. Him and I actually recorded a podcast that'll be dropping within a day or two,
heck yeah,
which
same with,
probably will be dropping before this. But anyways,
hey, real quick.
he had a really good point, and that was like, listen, at the end of the day, it's cliche, but control what you can control. Focus on what's in front of you. Take it day by day. At the end of the day, you got to be doing what you need to do to make sure you're in a position to play, whether it's with the team that you're with right now or whether it's with a team that might pick you up. You got to make sure you're staying in shape. You got to make sure that you're focusing on the things that you can control, which is your own physical traits and capabilities.
Right.
At the end of the day, the players, they don't have control over what these leagues decide to do, which of course is unfortunate. I am such a huge proponent of for the player. That's what these leagues have always told us that they're about, right? It's always been about the opportunities. It's always been about for the player, but oftentimes it ends up not being that, purely because of business reasons. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with the whole thing.
Real quick, off topic, just go back to your first point real quick. You send me that link to your new episode when it drops. I'll plug it into this episode so we can have it uploaded on the description so they can hit up your.
Oh, sweet. Absolutely.
Just want to plug you in, man. That's my way to pay you back for coming on this show. But no, back to the topic at hand. No, you're right, 100%. They've always emphasized and prefaced that they are for the player, and the player comes first. But ironically, we've come to this consensus that, hey, we're about to chop this thing in half, and we're going to be rolling forward with 52, 53 man rosters and 40 bodies that we're just going to bring in to give a look. I mean, like, really, like, we're cutting you of your jobs, we're cutting you of the opportunities. But now you look forward, and I'll segue into the outlook going forward with 2025. What is that going to say about, obviously there's been talks of ownership coming in and potentially that happening. How does that impact 2025? Are we going to see some of those shelved teams come back, and are we going to see some of those jobs reemerge? What is the sense on
I'd
that?
always love to say yes, but for right now, I've been a big proponent, and this is just the way I've talked to everybody, whether it's been on podcast or whether it's just been in person. Of course, that's kind of been the little thing like, hey, we could see teams come back. These leagues just have to make it through one season on their own. You know what I mean? Like right now, the focus is let's get through 2024. Of course, they have plans for the future. They have things that they want to do. They have owners they want to bring in. They have teams they want to bring back. But regardless of all that, that's not going to be officially sorted until we see them get through one season as a combined entity. That's the main goal. That's the main purpose. Because at the end of the day, if they can't get through one more season, I mean, if we can just hang up spring football and kiss it goodbye. So I think most importantly, get through one full season as a merge entity, and then take it from there, just based on what you saw in 2024.
All right, so let's transition into, we'll get back to that in a minute. I want to make that one of the final conversations. I want to get back into 2024 and the outlook going forward. So right now, a tentative date of March 30th, Saturday, March 30th is going to be the expected kickoff of the United Football League. That is what we know now. February 17th, that is the tentative date for when teams can report to their training camp. From what I've gathered, I don't think there's going to be hubs. I don't think the hub format is going to be a thing anymore. I think it is going to be independent stadiums, obviously, because you kicked out eight of them that, I mean, New Orleans didn't.
Right. The entire purpose of 8 is to have, and exactly kind of like I mentioned earlier with, what is Fox getting out of this? Fox is getting the ability to have all 8 teams in all 8 markets.
Right.
So that's kind of the plan there. But anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, if you had extra points to elaborate on that, you're more than welcome to, or I can pivot.
Yeah, what I will say is that when it comes to hubs, what we could potentially see utilized in some way, shape, or form is the XFL technically had a hub in 2023 because all the teams lived and practiced in Arlington and then flew out to their cities. So I'm assuming that we're gonna see, and just based on the little tidbits I've been told and gathered throughout this process, it sounds like practice is likely to be in Texas, at least for training camp. Whether or not we see that for the regular season is yet to be decided upon, but I could see it going in that direction just because of how much they seem to enjoy it this past season.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Again, travel costs can really be a big factor with that. So we'll have to see.
So now that the rosters are potentially looking at what, 90 man, if I'm not mistaken, and typically with the USFL and the XFL, it's anywhere from 50 to 53, from what I've seen in the past 2 years, at least with the USFL, 50. With, I want to say, 38 to 40 on the game day rosters, if I'm not mistaken.
It's typically 40 to 42
Okay,
on active rosters, and then you have another, at least in the USFL, it was 50-man rosters. I think XFL was 51.
gotcha.
But yeah, training camp rosters should be looking pretty big just based on what we've seen so far.
With training camp starting February 17th, games starting on March 30th, why in the hell have we not thought up? Why have the networks not thought of maybe doing a few televised games of exhibition games? And hear me out, for the simple fact that you are for the players, why not have it in Texas? The exhibition games, you can air it on ESPN or ABC or what have you, and we'll get into the network deals in a minute. For the simple fact you want to produce film for the players that are going to be cut, give them a look. I don't get that. Are we just going to do scrimmages that are not going to be televised? What's your sense on that? And do you think it's kind of unfair to those that aren't really going to be given a fair shot because it's a quick turnaround?
Well, you're absolutely right. Now, the one thing I do know is that, like, I believe from most of those scrimmages, we've seen Fox do some scrimmages where they've tested broadcasting things for the USFL, and players have been able to get a hold of that film for the most part, at least from what I've seen, where the practice film, the scrimmage film, that's all available to them, so they can at least use it and send it out to other teams and coaches. At least that's what I've been told. That's what I've heard. But to get back to your point, that would be a really neat way to engage the fans, to, engage the community, especially down there in Texas. If you did some exhibition games, gives a chance for players to really fight for their roster spots, just like we see in the NFL. The preseason can get really intense sometimes because these guys are literally playing for their careers. So I
Right.
think that would be a great opportunity for the leagues. As for broadcasting them, I mean, who in the world knows? I don't see that being at the forefront of their priorities at the moment currently. But it's definitely something to keep in mind. And honestly, if any of them are listening to this podcast, they should really take your idea up because I think that'd be a really cool thing to do and great way for more exposure for fans, players, and everybody else involved.
When I was putting together these highlights after the season, I had a plethora of players hit me up and ask for the highlight tapes. Tremendously grateful. Sorry it took me so long to get them back to you. But the main complaint was, we don't really have access to highlights. We don't have much film copy. And it's very difficult to work and produce film copy, because I was producing both the flashy highlights, but also the game film to send off to players. And so not having that availability, it blows my mind. Like, you're for the players, Why
Yeah.
won't you produce that? Why won't you make that content more accessible? So I don't know. That's one of my nitpicky complaints of the day. And I just didn't know if you had any clarity or take on that. Yeah, it just irked me, grinds my gears.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you on that. These players have again worked their butts off for these opportunities. So, even if they're not going to make the official team at the end of the day, just give them the tape from training camp, give them the stuff that they need so they can continue pursuing their professional careers.
And you also, let's segue into this too. So we'll get into television. Television will be the last thing, but with Under Armour becoming a thing for this new league, and again, cat's out of the bag, surprise. Do you think that there's going to be a chance for players to be endorsed more? Do you think that there's going to be a chance for teams or names to monetize a little bit more, given the fact that they're going to have a little bit more, it's going to be more flashy products, that they're more flashy merchandise that they're going to be wearing. These stadiums are going to be their sole home, so that's going to give you a lot more leeway to have a team store and whatnot. I just think there's a lot of opportunity here with not only Under Armour, but the fact that you're making this merge. You've already gotten established a few fan bases. All these fan bases really are pretty much established. I see this being a cash cow in the sense of endorsements, and I'm hoping these players take advantage of it and monetize off of it. I hope the window's there for them. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I absolutely agree. And kind of to go back to my original point a little bit earlier, I think we're gonna see some of these things come to fruition once they get through a season, right? Because they have a lot to iron out. Right now, the goal is let's just get through a season as a merged entity. Let's kick this thing off. Let's hopefully set a foundation for a future that is full of promise and like firm foundation, right? Because I mean, without that, you can't survive. But to get back to your point there, I think that's something we absolutely could see. Definitely seems like Under Armour will be playing a role within this new league. So could we see some partnerships? Could we see some sponsorship deals with some players? Some of the big names in these leagues. I mean, it would be, a guy like Ja'Cour Pearson. He's the type of guy I could absolutely see getting a sponsorship just because he's, Peasy, Jay Peasy. That's the man right there. Whatever team he ends up on, whether Seattle ends up being in it or whether or not he gets on another team, he's gonna be playing a big part in the league. So he's the type of guy with that camaraderie, with the camaraderie they have with guys like Destroying and other popular, I guess you could say figures within the scene.
Right.
Definitely something that's a possibility. I just don't think we would see that this year, but who knows?
And real quick, where are we at with salary negotiations? You heard anything?
At this point, a lot of stuff's behind NDAs, and I'm gonna leave it at that.
Makes sense. It was rhetorical anyway. I had it going for me. Uh Pivoting. All right. So most recent news, television deals, and NBC out of the picture. Enter ABC, ESPN, Fox. Who would have thought that we had both of the boys at the poker table? I didn't see this coming. I didn't think that ESPN would have a chance at even getting in the same room as Fox, but here we are. How do you think that divvies up? How do you think that impacts the season going forward? And do you think it'll be a one-time thing, or do you think this will be a part
I
for?
think it's interesting you say that because personally, I saw this coming from a mile away. Now, we knew for a fact that ABC and ESPN were going to be involved in the new league as long as the ownership of the XFL was still involved, which they are.
I guess
Fox seems to be at. I would say Fox probably holds the most weight from a broadcasting perspective, just because of the giant that they are, and just because of what we've seen them do in the spring football scene the last few years, whether it was the XFL in 2020 or, of course, the USFL the past couple of years. But I think the really interesting thing about all this is we're almost back to square one in a way, because the XFL in 2020, who were their partners? ABC, ESPN, and Fox. And
right.
here we are with a new merged league coming out, and those are the partners. NBC, I'm definitely gonna miss seeing them, involved. I really enjoyed the broadcast in general, especially the ones on NBC. They had some great announcers, Jack Collinsworth, Jason Garrett. Those guys. Those guys really did a great job for the brand. But we're entering a new era, and NBC is just not going to be a part of it, which, again, to me is not surprising at all because we knew ABC was coming into it. We knew they were going to be a part of the new league, and NBC, with some of the commitments they have, with the way they weren't all in on the USFL, I feel like, they were a part of it. They did great, amazing work. But it felt like they were definitely less invested than Fox. I mean, obviously Fox is the owner of the league. So to me it's not at all surprising. And an interesting tidbit is I had reached out to NBC for comment a couple months ago just on what their status was looking like, whether or not they were going to be part of part of the league, things like that moving forward in 2024. And things got really quiet when I mentioned that, those contexts went silent. So I kind of took that as a sign of, okay, we might not see NBC in the 2024 season. So for whatever that's worth, for me personally, it wasn't surprising.
So what about if I'm not mistaken? I think I caught a XFL game last season, a Seattle game. I want to say it was on FX, and then there was obviously you had USA and then NBC. What about those secondary channels? I mean, is that going to stay where it's at, or is
We
that
will see. John Oran reported that he expects games to be on FS1.
okay?
I'm hoping that FS1 is the only like true cable channel that we see.
Okay.
Because ESPN is cable, it's not over the air like Fox and ABC, but ESPN obviously is just the sports giant. I mean, you think of sports, you think of ESPN.
Yeah.
So with ESPN being involved, with ABC being involved, and with Fox being involved, was like probably the three biggest networks for these games to be aired on. FS1 being in there as background is not a problem at all in my opinion, because the FS1 games did really well in the XFL in 2020. With the USFL, they weren't great, but part of the reason, and we can go into so many details with these leagues, and why viewership here wasn't great, or people complaining about, oh, this game only had 250,000 viewers. It's like, at the end of the day, how many viewers do you expect for a game between the New Orleans Breakers and the Houston Gamblers when they're both playing in Birmingham? Like, why are we expecting there to be millions of viewers for that? Like, it's just not going to be. These teams aren't in their cities,
Right.
So, I think that's something that we'll see take a positive turn in this new league, depending on whether or not they're streamed on FS1. I see cable doing better just because we'll have all 8 teams in all 8 markets, and we have the firepower of ABC and Fox behind it. So,
Hey,
my 2 cents.
3 words, or it might be 2 words. Pre-game show. Hear me out. You do that on ABC.
You're telling me, bro.
You do that on ESPN, bro. You give it a whole different feel. You are adding the juice, man. Like environments like St. Louis and DC, the aesthetic is already bar none. Birmingham too. I mean, experiencing that firsthand, I didn't know what I was going into, and then I saw the atmosphere during a playoff game. I was like, "Hype me up, dude! Like, I want to be a part of this." The
Absolutely.
environment is absolutely rompous. So to see that, firsthand, I'm like, bro, throw a pregame show in there. Like, that's why I was hoping NBC would stick around, because that's what they're known for. Like, think about primetime football. First thing that comes to mind is Sunday Night Football. I don't know about you, but I guess the first game's tentatively set for a Saturday night. I'm thinking it's going to be on ABC. If they do it otherwise, then I don't know. I feel indifferent towards it. I think the first game should be a primetime game between two of the biggest juggernauts. I think that's how you start off the season, which I would hope
Arlington versus Birmingham, baby. The 2
that's what,
champions. Bring it on. Everybody's talking their crap. You got XFL fans like, oh, USFL teams can't compete. You got Birmingham Stallions fans who are like, Stallions run this shit. Like,
I
come on.
I disagree, bro. I think a game in St. Louis, the first night, a sold out crowd, some
See, I
USFL.
agree. But something to take into account, which I could be wrong, but typically, and this is what we saw in 2023, when you have domes and when you have cities, like again, Ford Field's going to be involved. You want to kind of front load the games in those southern states
Right.
earlier in the season, because you don't want to have those teams playing at home come June when it's freaking 100 degrees down there.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, could we see a home opener in St. Louis? Absolutely. I think that'd be great for the league, but I'm expecting the southern teams to have a bit more of a pull for those opening games, just because of the weather and things like that.
Hey, James, not to get like super close, but do you see these tan lines up here on the ice? That's battle.
I'm taking a look.
Yeah, well, maybe it's the lights, but there's tan lines there, like right there. Battle scars, brother. I was in that Birmingham heat. I was sweating, like, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe, dude. It absolutely
Oh,
is.
I can imagine.
It's a freaking oven on the field. But yeah, no, it's abysmal. It takes a while getting used to, but I get what you're saying. Yeah, no, I that makes sense. I've never really taken into account that that's how they kind of plan these out. Real
And you really can do some things to avoid it with the proposed 8-team setup, because you can have teams like Birmingham and Houston not play at home the final 2 weeks of the season. You can give San Antonio those final 2 home games because they have a dome. They're playing at the Alamo Dome. And then you can kind of let's save those home games for St. Louis, Michigan, up north teams, DC. They'll be fine. They'll probably have 60, 70-degree weather, and Michigan's inside anyway. So,
right. No, that's
just my personal 2 cents on how. I mean, we could see anything's possible. It's spring football.
Do you think, real quick, and by the way, I can't preface enough. We're nearing the end here, and I've got like 2 or 3 more questions, and I will set you free. But look, dude,
hurry it up. No, I'm just kidding.
Hurry up. No, I can't thank you enough, seriously, for being on here. Few more questions. With the whole, assuming that it's 8 teams, possibly 10 weeks, I would assume that's how they do things. What's the playoffs look like? What's the postseason like? And how much of the cushion could we expect if it's such an early start, being, March 30th? I mean, are we going to be looking at early June when we're going to see this thing come to a conclusion so players can get to training camps?
We're probably looking at like mid-June. What I'm being told is they want this to be a true spring league. So it's going to start, right when spring starts and end kind of right around when spring ends.
Okay.
So I think that's a timeline that we're looking at. As for the playoff structure, it should be, I mean, again, if we're looking at 8 teams, then you'd expect it to be very similar to what we've seen from the USFL and the XFL these past couple seasons, where you have 4 teams make the playoffs, 2 from each division. They battle it off in the semifinals, and then we have the championship. So that would be my expectation for an 8-team format. If we see 10 teams, obviously that format would be different. You might see 12 weeks. You might have to see playoffs go an extra week. But I think obviously the plan right now is for 8. So that's what we're looking at, a very similar structure right now.
Man, I wish it would have been. There's still a chance. There's a really good chance.
Hey, it's not over till it's over. So
look, dude, a longer season in the spring to dip right up to. That's when you start getting into like, okay, the number 1 seed going into the playoffs gets a bye week. Then we get a wild card week. Then we get
exactly.
it opens up the Pandora's box, if you will. But, yeah, man, I can't thank you enough for being on here. Any news we should be expecting coming up in the couple of weeks? Come on.
From what I'm being told, it's still going to be a while. I'm not expecting anything major until end of the month, if I'm being really honest.
James,
which
I heated up.
Is absolutely bizarre. I really thought that we should have more news by now, especially the leagues and that's been my one issue with this whole process is I totally get them having to keep things under wraps. I totally understand that you don't want things getting out until you have things finalized. But you have to realize, players, their livelihoods are on the line, their careers are on the line. Not only that, but you've got literally everybody involved has to figure out what the heck they're doing in 2 months. Like these things just don't. These players just can't snap their fingers and automatically have housing, have things set up, have travel plans set up for this takes time. This is a process. You also have a lot of players who have different training schedules, who have things like some players are like, well, should I be ready to play in February? Should I be ready to play in April? I need to know when I'm supposed to be ready to go. So, that whole process, I think, could have been played out a bit more smoothly. But, at the end of the day, I'm not in charge of making these decisions. So, again, I understand it. There's a lot that goes into a process like this, as you said.
Hey, real quick, you reminded me of something that was not mentioned, and it was that teams were still signing players, even though the 8-team merger was already being announced. Not saying that means anything.
Well, rumored, it wasn't announced.
Well, I'm talking about, yes, that's true. Transactions are still going on because it's business per usual.
It is business as usual until it's not.
Right.
So,
exactly.
And you look at the guys that get signed, a part of it's probably well, even if you don't play with us, at least you're in that pool of guys who are under contract that should end up in some sort of supplemental draft pool so they have a chance to get on a team type deal.
Right.
That is my personal guess on that. Again, business as usual.
That's a tremendous guess, and I couldn't agree more. Well, hey man, the past hour has been a blast. You've told me a lot. And I am truly grateful for you, the work you do, the stuff, the content you provide, man. You are truly I'm not blowing smoke, but like honestly, you are the Adam Schefter of the Spring League. I hope you know that. You're working into it, whether you want to admit it or not, James. You're working into it, and you're doing a hell of a job, dude. Like the possibilities are endless. You're just gonna keep on growing, and the success is gonna come, dude. Like you're doing a tremendous job, and I'm appreciative of it. Everybody in the community is appreciative of it, and we're just tremendously grateful for you, dude. You're an awesome person.
Man, I really appreciate that. And like I said, it's just a privilege to be in the scene. A few years ago, it really was just one of those things that just hit me. I was like, I discovered spring football. I realized there wasn't a lot of people doing this, and I was like, man, I want to make a career out of promoting these guys and covering these guys and giving them exposure. Again, and like you said, we've talked to so many of these players. We know how much this means to them. So again, for the player, that's that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it has been yet another episode of the Strive Sports Podcast. James is probably going to break some news in about a few business days or a few business weeks. We don't know, but we'll see. You've been listening to the Strive Sports Podcast, episode 12 to conclude the season. Right up the pike. See ya.